dear listeners. I'm Asia, and you're listening to Clearing the Air. Clearing the Air is a podcast, part of the Rethinking Climate family, opens conversations about complex and overlooked climate issues. We trust experts from a global network to bring different perspectives to our learning journey to show that there is space for everyone in the climate movement. Today we will talk about owning a sustainable business and diet with Bob Garner. He is co-owner of Casal Dei Fichi in the Marche in Italy, passionate host, husband, and environmentalist. So thank you, Bob, for being with us today.
It's a pleasure. My pleasure. It's great to see you.
So my first question is, was there or is there a stigma about owning a sustainable business? Like, what is your approach? What does the public say, or even other business owners?
Yeah. So myself and my husband, we've owned Casal Dei Fichi for 15 years, and we're in Le Marche in Italy. And it's a group of sustainable luxury holiday apartments. So I guess when we started out 15 years ago, there was less focus on the environmental movement. But of course, it was still there. This conversation about the concerns over the environment has been going on for decades, as we know. But I guess, yes, its time has come, and as people are starting to understand the impact that humans are having on the planet, and are starting to understand that they need to make changes in their personal life, as do businesses, as do governments, as does everybody in society. Awareness has grown, and people have understood now that the climate crisis is a core crisis that touches everybody in every community. It's no longer a marginal issue that people can ignore or can choose to deny. It's something that touches on everybody. So perhaps it was more of a niche in the past, but now it's certainly core, and I'm trying to encourage it to be a focus for everybody around the world.
That's very good, actually. I was actually expecting more of an answer that people preferred not to even approach the conversation about actually owning a sustainable business, which brings me to the next question, because is it expensive to make the whole transition that you have and all the attention that you've brought to actually make your business what it is today?
No. Is a simple answer. Working in the vacation rental industry as I do, I spend a lot of time talking to my colleagues and my peers around the world, and I'm trying to promote the point of sustainability within the vacation rental movement. And through my networks, I'm encouraging the competition and everybody around the world in my industry, which is the area I know most about, to make a change. And making those changes are not financially difficult. Most of the time, it's cost neutral. Sometimes you can save money as well. I'll give you a couple of examples if you'd like. So, for example, one of the things I always encourage people to do is the very first thing they do, because look for the simple, easy steps first, because that's where you're going to build up some confidence to go on to the next point. And that would be to convert your energy tariff from your electricity supplier to a renewable tariff, which is usually cheaper. And of course, it's as simple as contacting your supplier and saying, "I'd like to switch, please." And so that is a substantial impact on your personal or your business carbon footprint, but just by taking that very simple step. And I've wrote and spoken a lot about the 10 steps that I think businesses that in my industry should be doing and can do simply and easily to create a much lower carbon footprint for their business.
There's also for companies, for instance, like in Italy, that are not going so well. I mean, we know Italy has quite a crumbling economy right now, and it has been for quite a bit. Would you still possibly provide this advice and say that, maybe companies moving to more sustainable business, they could help their business themselves? What advice would you give to these kind of companies that are not doing so well?
Absolutely. I think the risk and the danger is that businesses in any industry, but certainly in my industry, the tourist industry, which of course has been badly affected by the COVID virus, is the need to bake environmental sustainability into the business, into everything you do around the business, not see it as an add-on that you think about later when you've ticked all the other boxes and got everything else sorted on your business strategy. You bake it in at first principles. And the reason you do that is, of course, it's now becoming much more important for business to show that they are environmentally sustainable. Of course, it's the right thing to do. Again, in my industry, it's a way of differentiating yourself from the competition and saying, if a person is looking at two businesses and saying, I could give my money to this business or I could give my money to this business, they're all exactly the same, other than one has a carbon neutral footprint or is doing something environmentally sustainable, then it's much more likely that the customer, the client, the person spending the money is going to give it to that business, because people are becoming aware of this issue and are looking for businesses taking some realistic and reasonable steps. So I'd say for the business, for the bottom line, it's a good thing to do. And the more difficulty you're in, the more reason you should do it, particularly in my industry, where we need to be differentiating ourselves from our client, from our competitors, and finding a way to say, look at us, we're brilliant, we're doing all the things that you'd expect us to do, giving good hosting, clean apartments, a lovely environment, etc. And we're doing some green initiatives as well. And in my experience, that makes a huge difference. So it's good for the business, it's good for the planet, it's good for the customer. It's a win-win-win.
That's great. And also, Casal Dei Fichi, as you told me, has a vegetable garden. You are vegan. What can you tell me about approaching a sustainable diet instead? Concerns, the stigma again, possibly. You and I had this conversation before, so we know the struggles sometimes come with the general public when we tell, so I'm not vegetarian anymore. But as a vegan, what can you tell me more about this?
Of course, there was a stigma. It was seen as something slightly offbeat. I went vegetarian when I was 20, so that's 40 years ago. And I remember in those days, of course, this was in the UK, you would go to a supermarket, there was very little choice. You'd go to a restaurant, there'd been vegetarian dishes on the menu. It was a much more of a challenging environment. Over the decades, of course, it's got so much easier now. You can go to almost any shop, any restaurant, any outlet and get a good meal or get the right ingredients that you want. So I think it's certainly become mainstream because people are understanding that a vegetarian or a vegan diet, or at least a flexitarian diet, which is when you do it some days, you don't do it others, is both good for your health, good for your pocket, and good for the environment. So people are starting to understand that because, of course, we know that the food that we eat accounts for something like 18% of our personal carbon footprint. So if we are going to take responsibility and start to tackle our carbon footprint and get it down to more manageable levels, then to avoid tackling the food area puts all the more pressure on other areas of our life that we need to tackle as well, like flying less, like driving less, like using less plastic, like changing the way that we shop and the way we buy and the way we consume. So my encouragement would be that people should be looking holistically and looking at their carbon footprint of the food that they eat, and particularly the meat and the dairy industry, which have a really, really high carbon footprint compared to many other foods, as I guess we'll go on to talk about. So for me, I find it very interesting that many of the people I meet and see, and this is no criticism of any of these people, they're passionate environmentalists. They believe that we need to make a difference, that we need to make a change, that as you're doing, as we're all trying to do in educating ourselves and educating other people. But there seems to be a little bit of a blocker, a mental block that even a lot of the most radical environmentalists, when it comes to their food choices, seem to have a sort of, I can't go there, I can't deal with the food side of it. I'll deal with every other aspect of my life, but when it comes to food, I'm not sure that I can give up that meat. I'm not sure I can cut down. And I like to call it the edible elephant in the room. You know, there's the elephant in the room there that we're not talking about, and we should be talking about food, because food has a significant impact on our carbon footprint.
Definitely. We also, because we talked about this before, we were making the comment that gallons of water are being used to sustain the meat industry and the farming industry. So you're from the UK, but what about culture? What can you tell about, environmentalists? People think it's about culture. Italy is a land where people eat a lot of meat. The UK, quite similar. So what is advice that you can tell these? What can we tell environmentalists? As myself, for instance, because I was a vegetarian for quite a few years, about 5 or 6, and then I didn't feel too well, and I moved back to the meat diet. But I'm trying to transit back again, exactly because there's this whole reasoning that if you want to be an environmentalist, at least slowly transit by taking as much as you can meat out of your own diet. What can we tell?
You're absolutely right. And the first thing I would say is I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to claim that I'm better than anybody else. I'm here to say that this is what works for me, and I feel comfortable with this lifestyle, and I feel comfortable that it's helping me have a lower carbon footprint. Everybody is different. There are different cultures, different attitudes, different ways of living. But I still genuinely believe that in every culture, in every society, people can make changes. Maybe they can't go vegan, maybe they can't even go vegetarian, but everybody can have food choices and decide, for instance, that they won't eat meat at every meal. They won't eat meat until the evening, or they will have a vegetarian day a week. These can have an immediate and significant impact on the climate. Obviously, people think, oh, I'm one person, I can't make a difference. But we know that when people get together, they can make a difference. So what I'm really saying is, let's think about what's happening with the climate. Let's think about where our food comes from and what impact it's having on the environment. So to give you one example, beef, probably the worst meat, the worst food ingredient that you can eat. Obviously, we understand that a lot of the rainforests in South America are being cleared. They're being cleared to grow soy. That soy, 95% of it is not being fed to humans. It's being fed to animals, to beef, which are then slaughtered. And during the process of their living, beef give out methane. Methane, we know, is 34 times more dangerous to the environment than CO2. So we're clearing the rainforests, which, of course, the trees are the lungs of the earth, as we all understand. So we're clearing the rainforests to grow soya. We're giving most of that soya to animals. Those animals are polluting the environment. We're averaging, I think, 40 kilograms of meat per year in the world. In the developed world, it's double that. We're eating far too much protein. We're getting far too obese in certain parts of the world. We need to look again at the diet and say, what do we need to eat? How can we adapt our diet that is good for us, is good for animals, and is good for the planet? So I guess my simple answer would be to encourage people to start to understand the carbon impact of the food that they eat and start to make some shifts in their choices to some of the ingredients and some of the components of their diet that are much lighter on the environment.
I find that that's very, futuristic as well, because I find that the conversation never really leads to people making an active choice. It seems like the meat industry, when it comes to the environment, is quite the wall that we always hit, or the edible elephant in the room, which I think is the perfect way of putting it. Even considering when people talk about children not wanting to approach a more sustainable diet for their children, considering that we've noticed and we've seen, and science has sort of proven that our bodies are shifting because of the food that we're picking, because also of the way governments and are treating the vegetables that are also being provided to us, because there is a concern in that area as well. And also approaching the conversation there could improve our diet as a whole. But as we start, decreasing the amount of meat we eat, that's, I guess, definitely a beginning point. So, Bob, is there anything else you want to tell our audience?
Well, of course, we have to look at these issues holistically. So a couple of statistics. We know that 70% of antibiotics that are produced are given to livestock. We understand that there's an antibiotic resistance that's growing around the world. So the more we use antibiotics in livestock, the less effective other antibiotics become in the human population. So in terms of our own health, it makes sense that we start to change that attitude of cattle, mass pork, billions and billions of animals, hundreds of billions are eaten over the decade, and that's a significant impact on our health and on the environment. I would just encourage people to think that what is the right balance for them and what is the thing that they can achieve quickly that can make a difference. I've always thought that of environmental steps are a little bit like a drug. You take one or two small steps, you start to feel good about the steps that you've taken, you communicate that out to other people, and then you get positive feedback, and then you feel comfortable to take another step. And of course, I'd like many more people to be vegetarian, but I think, as I said earlier, just take some small steps and see how you feel about that and get some positive feedback from the people around you. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be criticised for becoming a vegetarian or a flexitarian or even a vegan, but it's always nice to get that positive feedback. I think the other thing I would say structurally about what's happening with meat versus non-meat is that we know that in Europe and in America, to give two examples, the meat industry is massively subsidized. So, of course, meat is actually very cheap to buy. And unfortunately, we need a structural change because some of the non-meat ingredients, the fruits and the vegetables that we can eat and should eat more of, are not so much subsidized. So, of course, there is a balance there that we need to find how we can influence politicians to make a change, to make a difference there. Because we need to take those subsidies away so that the people are more encouraged to eat a healthy diet, which, of course, the politicians all say they want you to, but that doesn't translate into policy and regulation. And that needs to change as well.
Well, to change politics, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of time, and the politicians, as first of all, should believe what they're saying, but we know that that's not always the case. One last question, and it's a little advice to whomever is going through the process maybe of transit. How do you approach the conversation? Even people who come in your business and come to Casal Dei Fichi and maybe ask you, are you vegan? How long have you been vegan? How do you do it? And what do you tell them when you face somebody who's trying to justify their own choices of, I'm eating meat, I can't do any differently, and feels like they're being very defensive? So how do you approach the conversation in that sense?
It's funny, when I was in my 20s, I used to be very strident about it, and I would almost be poking a finger at somebody and lecturing them about their diet and giving them the statistics and encouraging them to change. I don't think that works. I think you've got to reach the heart as well as the mind of people and explain in a supportive and gentle way. The natural response that I always get, and it always happens over the dinner table, of course, is people say, why you're a vegan or why you're a vegetarian, and you explain where you are. And the natural response almost always is, oh, well, I don't eat much meat. There's a defensiveness there. And I always wonder, well, who's eating all this meat then? Because everybody I speak to says they're not. So somebody somewhere is eating all this meat. As meat consumption continues to rise. So what I say to our guests, because, of course, we have a whole range of environmental activities going on here in terms of plastic and solar and energy and the garden and the special toilet paper and the refillable containers and blah, blah, blah. I go on and on. People start to ask about that and I start to talk about it. And then I introduce the food aspect as an aside. I don't preach. I never criticize. I just encourage people to try it or to try it a little bit more than they're doing already. And I think that's all that one can do, because I think if you attack somebody, food is a very personal thing. It's like religion, it's like politics. I think you have to tread very carefully around it, and to preach and tell somebody what they should be eating is, I think, a shortcut, having an argument and a very poor relationship. So I would never do that. But I do try to talk about it, because I think one of the aspects for me of being a vegan is I do want other people to see that it's a healthy diet, that you can eat really well on it, and that you're doing something good for animals and for the planet. So I truly believe that, but I think it has to be done in a careful, sensitive way.
It is a very a delicate topic, and I guess I'll conclude by saying it is also a conversation I think needs time to evolve. Often the conversation has to go through we're helping the planet because we're helping everybody else. And I consider myself an animalist as well. I have worked as well in the animal rights field. So often the conversation is never we're trying to save also a being who feels. So, but I guess that's a whole other podcast episode. So thank you for your time, Bob. Listeners, you can find the link to Casal Dei Fichi down in the description. So thanks to you for listening. Thanks to you, Bob, for being with us today. You listen to Clearing the Air. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And of course, do not forget to click the like button on YouTube and subscribe to the channel.